Are we rolling tape? Are we on tape?
We are on tape so far, but what's new is we have new questions from the listeners that are sent in a number of ways to cornydrivethrough@gmail.com or on Twitter using the hashtag cornydrivethrough. And actually, this first one here, Jim, is a little bit of an addendum to the previous week's Jim Cornette experience. This is from Charlie Conley. Hello, my cult leader. Love the experience about February 2nd, 1986. Great show, but you forgot one important thing that happened on that day. February 2nd, 1986 was the day that Gino Hernandez was found dead.
Oh.
And then I guess he was just giving us that note right there. But any thoughts on Gino, Jim?
Well, that took a disturbing turn real quick. I thought we were going to follow up on, and as a matter of fact, we have got follow-up. Before I talk about Gino, there's no sense backtracking to this, but we have got follow-up. A couple of cult members have written in. The card in Cincinnati with Hulk Hogan and Terry Funk, we had ascribed 5,000 people to, actually was reported somewhere at 10,000.
Wow.
And a very good source, an old friend and compadre of mine who probably need to remain nameless. Who knows? I may get heat on him, but said that he's from the Orlando or from the Florida territory, and said that the Florida show that night was in Orlando and we had given 1,000 and they had about 1,500. So 55,000 or so live tickets for February 2nd. But anyway, no, Gino was there in World Class when Bobby and Dennis and I first got there. And it was obviously Chris Adams had a great run as a babyface there at first, and then they'd switched him heel. And when we came in, pretty much the programs were Gino and Chris working with Kevin and Kerry in singles on the spot shows and or the big shows, or rotating tags. One Man Gang with Gary Hart was there also, and he had a program going with Kerry individually apart from them, because Mike had still, right until about the time that we got there, had been sick but had gotten back in the business. But otherwise than us and the Fantastics, that was pretty much the roster. I mean, Brian Adidas was always there because he was a friend of the Von Erichs. He was a good underneath babyface. And they brought Rip Oliver in for a brief time when they brought Billy Jack in, and he left. I mean, it was a small crew. So, Gino was a tremendous talent, and especially for the territory days. And I don't mean that he couldn't excel on a main stage like the WWF or whatever. I mean, his body would have hurt him with Vince, but probably not the fans, because he could work. And he actually could work better as I've gone back and watched more tape, especially of him in San Antonio and a couple other places. He took a lot better bumps and a lot more of them when he wasn't working on those fucking concrete, hard-ass world-class rings, especially in the Sportatorium. Dennis Condrey it bugged him to death, because every time Gino took a fucking bump, he put his hands like a backdrop. He put his hands down first. And that just used to bug, because Dennis, had those perfect snap, boom, boom, boom. But then after he'd worked in Dallas for fucking 3 or 4 weeks we'd been there, he actually said, I'm starting to understand why he fucking does that, because that ring was horrible. But anyway, but Gino excelled in a situation like that because he was living his gimmick, which wasn't a gimmick, it was him, in Dallas, Texas, making $150,000 a year or so in a top spot like that, working with the Von Erichs, being on television, and still having time to have a life, driving that sports car around Dallas, Fort Worth, and doing all the other things that we now know that he did, good and bad. I don't think, I mean, because he had the ego, he would have wanted to be a big star in the WWF and travel across the country and boom, 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 and he'd wear the suits. It would look like Flair doing it, but I don't know whether he would have kept it up as long as Flair did. I don't think he would, I don't know if that lifestyle would have been his. And at the same point, once again, Gino was a great old-fashioned heel and had that cocky look, and he could do a promo good, and he looked fucking great, but he wasn't a superhero physically. So when the business changed, he he was very Piperish in all those qualities, and Roddy was the guy whose personality made him stand out, and he overcame that. He never was fucking huge. Gino didn't project the toughness that Roddy could, whether it was, in a worked or shoot situation. I don't know whether he would have made it in the WWF or not. WCW, 3 years after he died, was on its fucking ass anyway. So if he hadn't gone to New York, he'd have probably been buried with all those 90s guys in WCW that you never heard from again.
You were working for Crockett when he passed away. Do you remember how you heard, who you heard it from, and were you surprised?
Well, I cannot remember. I probably the Wrestling Observer in those days, to be honest with you, because if it was on a Sunday, well, no, you know what? We would have heard by the next Tuesday at TV. We would have heard somebody in the locker room would know by then, because it's not like I was in Gino's social circle. So friends of his would not have called me. It wouldn't have been on any kind of national news that we could read, but somebody would have called somebody in the locker room by the following Tuesday.
What about the Houston office? Would someone have called you from the Houston office?
No, I've talked to Bruce often, even in those days, but I don't think he would alert. He wasn't alerting me to all the passages, especially as it began to become a trend at that point from the state of Texas. So it would have been a TV from one of the boys, and surprised. Probably still was then. I can't. It's been so long since I was actually surprised when something like that happened to anybody in the business. But probably, yeah, at the time, because it wasn't common. And yeah, and I can't remember what was the first theory. What was the first story that went around? Because were people starting to suspect foul play yet, or how did they present it?
I'm not exactly sure when they suspected foul play, but two things I know of. One was there was a theory that it was suicide. There was a theory that he just ingested too much accidentally. And then there were fans who, I believe, started calling the police station and reporting that they thought Chris Adams did it.
Yeah, because Adams was getting even because he had just blinded Chris Adams in the angle. No, knowing Gino, I assumed it was accidental, obviously. And then later on, people were like, well, it doesn't look right. But I think that was a lot of people that wanted to romanticize some things, but you never know. But no, I always liked Gino. He was, like I said, we didn't hang out in the same social circles because he legitimately, after the Sportatorium, was going to get in a fucking suit and go somewhere in downtown Dallas where a lot of money was going to be spent and flashy people. And I was going home to Irving and having a fucking pizza. But he was cool to talk to and hang out with in the locker room. I think they knew their spot was safe, even from the Midnight Express, because of, Gino most of the time went to the booking meetings, which was a big crew, but it was David Manning, it was Bronco Lubitsch, it was Fritz himself, it was Ken Mantell, the babysitter, the booker. Gary Hart usually went and represented whatever interest he had, whether it was One Man Gang or then Gino and Chris, but Gino was in there too. And they knew that we had come over there kind of under duress, so that they also knew before we did that we weren't going to get a run with the Von Erichs. So it wasn't like they were trying to cut our nuts off anyway. So we peacefully all coexisted, and they just made a lot more money for doing the same thing that we did. But Gino was a good talent. It wasn't a gimmick.